She thought she knew what fear looked like. She had seen it in the eyes of customers who got bad news over the phone at her bar. She had felt it herself, alone in a hospital waiting room with a sick 6-year-old and a credit card that was closer to its limit than she wanted to admit. But she had never seen fear look the way it looked on Cole Grayson's face. Because it did not look like fear at all. "You think I'm scared of you?" Madison's voice cracked at the edges, but she did not step back. "I've worked double shifts for 3 years to feed my daughter. I've patched leaking pipes at 2 in the morning and smiled through it. You think 3 guys with bad tattoos and worse intentions are going to make me hand over this register?" Cole Grayson smiled. And that smile was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. Not because it was cruel, because it was certain. The Iron Horse Tavern closed at midnight on weeknights, which meant Madison Carter usually started her closing routine around 11:15. She had a system. She always did. Wipe the tables from the back of the room forward, stack the stools on the high tops, run a damp rag along the bar rail, check the salt and pepper shakers, and then count the register while an old Hank Williams song drifted quietly from the jukebox in the corner. She had done it so many times she could do it half asleep. Which was lucky, because after a 9-hour shift on her feet, half asleep was about all she had left. It was a Thursday in late October, the kind of cold that arrived early in Redwood Falls, Montana, where the wind came down off the Rockies and cut straight through whatever you were wearing like it had a personal score to settle. The sky outside was the deep ink blue black that only existed in places far enough from the city that the stars had room to breathe. There were 4 customers still in the bar when the trouble started. Ray Kowalski, a 60-year-old truck driver who came in every Thursday without fail and always ordered the same thing: a Budweiser, a glass of water, and the meatloaf sandwich. He was a man of habits, which Madison had always respected. Beside him sat Darlene Hutchins, who worked down at the county assessor's office and was celebrating her last night before a vacation she had been planning and saving for 8 long months. At the far end of the bar sat 2 younger men Madison did not recognize, construction workers probably from out of town based on the red clay dust still caked on their boots. They had been quiet all night, good tippers, no trouble. The door opened at 11:47. Madison knew the exact time because she had just glanced at the clock above the register, calculating how long she had before she needed to start counting if she wanted to make it home before 1 in the morning. 3 men walked in. She knew immediately they were not there for drinks. It was not something she could have explained to someone who had never worked a bar. But everyone who had spent enough time behind one developed a kind of radar for it. The way certain people entered a room, the way their eyes moved, not looking for an empty stool or a familiar face, but scanning the room the way you studied a map, taking inventory, measuring distances, identifying exits, and, more importantly, identifying who stood between them and those exits. Cole Grayson walked in first. He was maybe 32 with a wide jaw and small eyes that did not quite match the width of his smile. He wore a black canvas jacket with a logo on the sleeve that Madison did not recognize. The 2 men behind him were bigger, wearing the same jacket. All 3 of them moved with the deliberate ease of men who were used to walking into rooms and having the temperature drop around them. "We're closed," Madison said, keeping her voice level. "Last call was 20 minutes ago." Cole looked at her the way a person looked at something they found mildly amusing. "We're not here for drinks, sweetheart." "Then I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We're closing." Cole crossed the room slowly, moving between the tables the way a man moved when he wanted you to understand that he had no reason to hurry. He sat down at the bar stool directly in front of Madison and folded his hands on the rail with an almost theatrical politeness that made her stomach pull tight. "Where's the owner?" "Not here." "When does he get back?" "I don't know." Cole tilted his head slightly. "You're lying." "I'm really not." "Jackson Walker," Cole said. "We have business with him. Business he has been avoiding, and I think you already know about it." Madison kept her expression flat. She did know about it, actually. Jackson had told her 3 weeks ago that a crew had been moving through the area, collecting what they called insurance premiums from local businesses. He had said it in the same steady, matter-of-fact tone he used for everything, like it was an inconvenience rather than a threat. He had told her he wasn't paying. She had not thought much about it again. Until this exact moment. "I don't know anything about that," she said, "and I need you to leave." Cole looked at her for a long, unhurried moment. Then he looked around the bar, moving his gaze from face to face with a slow deliberateness that forced each person to look somewhere else. Ray looked at his beer. Darlene looked at her phone. The two construction workers found something interesting about the ceiling. "Nobody here is going to help you," Cole said. It was not cruel. It was just a statement of fact, delivered with the confidence of someone who had done this before. Many times. "So let me tell you how this works. You're going to go to the register. You're going to give me whatever's in it. And then you're going to tell Jackson Walker that the price just went up because he made us come in person." Madison's heart was hammering. She could feel it in her throat, in her temples, in the tips of her fingers. But she had learned something in 25 years of living a life that had not always been easy. That the moment you showed fear to someone who fed on it, you gave them exactly what they came for. And once you gave it, they never stopped coming back. "No," she said. The word just came out. Not defiant, not theatrical, just a flat, honest no. The same word she would have used if someone tried to add a tip without asking. Cole's smile did not change, but something behind his eyes did. "What did you say?" "I said no." She picked up the damp rag from the bar rail and turned to wipe down the back counter. "The register stays where it is. You can leave a message for Jackson if you want. There is a notepad by the phone." A silence settled over the room. Then Cole reached across the bar and grabbed her wrist. Not hard, not yet, but firm enough to stop her. Firm enough to make the point. She turned and looked at him. He leaned in close enough that she could smell the cigarettes on him. "I don't think you understand what's happening here," he said quietly. "Let me put it simply. Your boss has been avoiding us for 3 weeks. That makes us look bad. And when we look bad, bad things start happening to the people around the person who made us look bad. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Let go of my arm," she said. "Do you understand what I'm saying? Let go of my arm." He did not let go. He squeezed once, and she felt the bones in her wrist compress, and she bit down on the inside of her cheek to keep from making a sound. "Ray," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was surprised by that. "Call the police." Ray Kowalski did not move. She understood. She genuinely did. Ray was 60 years old. He had a wife back in Billings and 2 grandkids he talked about every single Thursday. He was not a coward. She refused to let herself think of him that way. But he was a man who had done a calculation and arrived at an answer, and the answer was that there was nothing he could do in this room that would not end with him on the floor. One of Cole's men walked calmly to the front door and turned the deadbolt. The sound of it sliding home was the loudest thing Madison had ever heard. Darlene had gone completely still. The 2 construction workers were looking at each other with the expression of men having the same conversation without any words. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Cole released Madison's wrist and pointed at the register. "Open it." And then something in her broke open, or maybe something hardened, because she was suddenly aware that she was shaking, but not from fear, from rage. Genuine, cellular rage that started somewhere behind her sternum and moved outward into her hands. She thought about her daughter Lily, asleep at her mother's house 2 miles away. 6 years old, small enough to still need a nightlight, who had gotten sick twice the previous winter, whose medical bills had taken Madison 4 months to pay down. She thought about why she was standing behind a bar at 11:47 on a Thursday night, instead of home reading bedtime stories and watching cartoons. Because she worked. Because she had always worked. Because she had built the small, carefully constructed life she had without anyone's help. In a state where the winters were long and the margins were thin, and the luxury of someone saving you was not something you could count on. She was not going to open that register. She was not going to give these men a single dollar that belonged to Jackson Walker, who had never once treated her like less than a full human being, who had quietly added her to the schedule without making her ask when Lily got sick, who paid her 40 cents above county minimum because he said anyone doing honest work deserved to be paid honestly. She pulled her arm back and looked Cole Grayson directly in his small, flat eyes. "I am not opening anything," she said, "and I am asking you one last time to leave." The back of Cole's hand caught her across the cheek. It was not a punch. It was almost casual, the way you swatted a fly. And somehow, that casualness, that complete absence of emotion, the sense that she was something so far beneath him he did not even need to get angry, was worse than anything he could have done with real violence. She stumbled back into the shelves of liquor. A bottle fell. Glass exploded across the floor. Ray Kowalski stood up from his stool. Cole's man nearest to him took one single step forward. Ray sat back down. Darlene made a sound that was not quite a word. Madison straightened. Her cheek burned. Her eyes were watering, and she blinked it away and stood back up to her full height and looked at Cole without looking away. "I know you think that just made me afraid," she said. Her voice had gone very quiet. "But the only thing I'm feeling right now is that I hope you're still in this room in about 5 minutes. Cole's expression shifted into something that was not quite irritation and not quite curiosity. 5 minutes, she repeated. "Because Jackson checks in at midnight every single night, and if I don't pick up, he comes in, and you really, really do not want him to come in." It was a bluff, partially. Jackson did call the landline at midnight every night. That part was true. If nobody picked up in 3 rings, he called again. And if nobody picked up, then he came. He had done it since the night 2 years ago when a customer had a medical emergency and Madison had been trying to get help while the phone rang unanswered. But she did not know if tonight would be the night Jackson would follow through. She did not know if he would assume she had just stepped outside. She did not know anything except that her cheek was burning and Cole Grayson needed to believe something that would make him hesitate. Cole looked at his watch. Slow, deliberate, like a man with all the time in the world. "Midnight," he said. "That gives us about 13 minutes. He smiled. More than enough. He walked around the end of the bar. Madison stepped back. Cole. She hated that she said his name. She had not meant to let on that she knew it, but it came out anyway. And the way his expression shifted when he realized she recognized him told her she had just made a mistake she could not take back. "Jackson told you about us?" Cole said. He stopped walking. His voice went flat and cold in a way the earlier casual menace had not been. "Interesting. He told his bartender about us." "He doesn't talk business with me," Madison said quickly. "I just heard a name, that's all." "No." Cole shook his head. "No, see, now I'm curious, because if Jackson told you enough for you to recognize my name, then he told you enough to know what happens when people don't cooperate." He took another step forward. "And yet here you are, not cooperating. Which means one of 2 things. Either you're much braver than you look," he tilted his head, "or Jackson made the mistake of making you feel protected." He was getting closer. She was running out of room between herself and the back wall. "You are not protected," Cole said. "Jackson Walker is one man, and one man who owes us $20,000 in back premiums cannot protect anybody. He doesn't owe you anything. He owes us everything. Every business in this county understands that. Except him." His voice dropped. "Help me understand why." "Because he's a better man than you," Madison said. The room went so quiet she could hear the jukebox clicking between songs. Cole looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded slowly, the way a person nodded when they had made a decision they had been putting off. "Take the register," he told his men. "Take it off the counter. Tip it over." One of his men reached across the bar, grabbed the register with both hands, dragged it to the edge, and dropped it. The sound of it hitting the floor was enormous. Coins exploded, the drawer cracked open. Bills scattered across the hard wood like leaves caught in a sudden wind. "That's what it looks like," Cole said, "when nobody's protected." Ray Kowalski stood up again. He planted both feet. His face had gone dark red, and Madison could see that he was making a different calculation now, the kind where the math stopped mattering. "That is enough," Ray said. His voice was shaking, but he did not sit back down. Cole's man was between them in 2 steps. "Sit down, old man." "He said enough," said one of the construction workers from the far end of the bar. He had gotten to his feet. The other one was already standing. For one strange electric second, it almost felt like the whole room was going to push back. Cole raised his hand, a lazy, patient gesture. He was not worried. He had run this calculation before, and he knew how it ended. Good people could summon a moment of bravery, but bravery without experience, bravery without backup, was not bravery. It was just sacrifice. And these men had no interest in sacrificing themselves for a situation that was not theirs to carry. "Everybody sit down," Cole said quietly, "or I start with whoever's standing." Ray looked at Madison. His eyes held something that was going to stay with her for a long time, regardless of how the night ended. He sat down. The construction worker sat down, and Madison was alone. Cole was less than 4 feet away now. He wasn't angry. That was the thing about him that terrified her most. He wasn't enjoying it either. He was simply completing a transaction. This was something that needed to happen. He was the person who made things like this happen, and emotion had nothing to do with it. She pressed back against the back shelf. A second bottle tipped, and she caught it without looking. "Last chance," Cole said. "Tell me what I need to know about Jackson Walker, and tonight ends quietly. Where does he keep his records? Who does he call when he has a problem?" He paused. "What's he got in that back office?" "I don't know anything about his back office." "Everybody knows something," Cole said. "What does he keep in the cabinet behind the bar?" The question landed strangely because she had wondered that herself. The locked cabinet under the counter, old dark wood with a brass latch that Jackson kept on a key he never set down. She had seen him open it exactly once, and he had done it quickly and turned away before she could see more than a flash of dark leather. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Wrong answer." Cole reached for her, and at that exact moment the bar went dark. Not a power outage, not a blown fuse. Someone had hit the exterior breaker from outside. The entire room dropped to the dim emergency lighting above the exits. 2 dull red rectangles that turned everything into shadow and silhouette. Cole stopped. Even he had not expected that. And then they heard it. Motorcycles, not 1, not 2, more than Madison could count in the moment she heard them. The sound building from somewhere out on the highway and getting louder and closer until the vibration of it moved up through the floor of the bar and into the soles of her shoes and into her chest. Cole turned toward the door. His 2 men looked at each other. Nobody moved. The motorcycles got close enough that the sound was no longer just sound. It was pressure. The low thundering pulse of dozens of engines decelerating, rolling into the parking lot. The crunch of gravel under tires, and then one by one the engines cutting off until the silence that followed was so complete that Madison could hear Darlene breathing from across the room. And in that silence, they heard footsteps on the wooden porch. Slow, unhurried, one person. The deadbolt turned from the outside. Madison did not know how. Jackson had the only key. The door opened and Jackson Walker stepped in out of the cold. He was wearing his usual canvas work jacket and the same worn boots he wore every single day. His silver hair was damp from the night air outside. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the room. The toppled register, the broken glass, the bills scattered across the floor, the red shadow of the emergency lights falling across Cole Grayson's suddenly very still face. He took all of it in without a word. Then he looked at Madison. She had known Jackson Walker for nearly 2 years. She had seen him handle a kitchen fire, a flooded basement, a health inspection that nearly shut them down, and the slow grinding pressure of a business that survived on thin margins and long hours. She had never once seen him lose control of his expression. She had never once seen him look the way he looked right now. Not angry, not afraid, just done. "Jackson Walker," Cole said. He was recalibrating, She could hear it in his voice. A faint shift in register, not quite uncertainty, but the sound of a man who had walked into a room expecting one situation and found a completely different one. "You're a hard man to find." Jackson did not answer. He walked to the bar. He stepped over the broken glass without looking at it. He set his keys on a counter. He looked at Madison once more, and then at the mark on her cheek. And then he reached beneath the counter, and he opened the locked cabinet, and he took out the vest. It was old dark leather, worn smooth across the shoulders and soft at the cuffs. The patches on the back had faded, the way things faded when they had been packed away for years. The colors dulled at the edges, slightly frayed but still visible. Still clear enough for anyone who knew what they were looking at to understand exactly what they meant. Cole Grayson went very still, because Cole Grayson knew exactly what he was looking at. "You said you left," Cole said. His voice had lost something. She could not name what exactly. "You walked away from all of this." "I did," Jackson said. He did not put the vest on, he just held it. "Then what is that?" "A memory," Jackson said, "and a message." Cole swallowed. It was the first real human thing she had seen him do all night. "What kind of message?" Jackson laid the vest on the bar between them. He turned to face Cole fully for the first time, and now Madison understood why Ray standing up had made Cole pause, because Jackson made him pause simply by existing in the same room. It wasn't size, it wasn't posturing, it was something older than that. The kind of stillness that only came from a person who had been in enough serious rooms to stop being afraid of them. "The kind," Jackson said quietly, "that tells you those bikes outside didn't come here by coincidence." Cole turned back toward the door. He said something to his men in a low voice. One of them started moving toward the exit. It opened before he reached it. The man who walked in filled the frame completely. He was somewhere past 50, with a close-cropped gray beard and hands the size of dinner plates. He wore a vest identical to the one on the bar. He looked at the room once and then settled his gaze on Cole's man with a patience that was almost kind. "You're going the wrong way," the big man said. Behind him, through the open doorway, Madison could see the parking lot, and what she saw in that parking lot made her understand for the first time all night what Jackson had meant when he said the bikes had not come by coincidence. 37 motorcycles. She counted them later. 37 bikes parked in 2 neat rows, their riders standing quietly in the cold Montana night, watching the barred door with the particular stillness of men who had agreed on what they were here for and were simply waiting for someone to give them a reason to move. Cole Grayson had walked into a bar to shake down what he thought was a quiet, harmless old man. He had found something else entirely. He turned back to Jackson, and this time the calculation was written across his face. Not the lazy arithmetic of dominance, but genuine problem-solving. Because Cole Grayson had spent 5 years building a reputation in this county by knowing exactly when the numbers were in his favor. Right now, the numbers were catastrophically against him. "This isn't over," Cole said. The words came out steady enough, but they were the words of a man trying to preserve the last of something. "I know," Jackson said, and his voice was not unkind. "Which is exactly why I want you to take your men and walk out of here tonight, and think very carefully about what happens if you come back. You're threatening me. I'm making sure you understand a situation clearly. There's a difference." Jackson looked at him. "You've been running this county by making sure people don't have options. Tonight you found out that some people have more options than others. Take that information and use it. That's the best offer you're going to get." Cole looked at the vest on the bar. He looked at the open door. He looked at his 2 men who were looking at the floor. Then he looked at Madison. And the look he gave her was something she was going to think about for a long time. Not because it was threatening, but because something in it was almost unreadable, like a man who had added up a column of numbers and arrived at an answer that had genuinely surprised him. He walked to the door. His men followed. The big man in the doorway stepped aside to let them pass. Nobody in the parking lot moved. Cole walked to his car, not to a motorcycle, And that detail, Madison would realize later, said something important about who he was and who he was not. He got in and drove away. His men followed in a second car. The headlights swept across the bar windows, and then they were gone. For a long moment, nobody inside the bar spoke. Then, Ray Kowalski picked up his beer, looked at the foam settling inside it, and said, "Well, that was something." Darlene laughed too loud, the laugh of someone releasing 10 minutes of compressed terror. The two construction workers looked at each other, and one of them let out a long, slow whistle through his teeth. Madison let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Her cheek was still burning. Her hands, when she looked down at them, were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat on the bar rail and waited for it to stop. Jackson looked at her. "How's your face?" "I've had worse." She hadn't, actually, but it felt like the right thing to say. "No, you haven't," he said. She smiled, and it hurt a little where Cole had hit her, and she did not care. "The register's on the floor," she said. "I can see that. There's a broken bottle, too. I'll get it. Jackson." She stopped him before he moved. "Who called them the bikes? Who called them—" Jackson was quiet for a moment. He looked at the vest on the bar. Then he reached out and picked it up and folded it once carefully and held it against his chest. "I did," he said. "You called them." "I've been watching Cole Grayson move through this county for 6 months," Jackson said. "I knew he was going to come here eventually. I just didn't know when. So I made a phone call 3 weeks ago and told an old friend to stay close." She stared at him. "You've known for 3 weeks?" "I've known for 3 weeks." "Jackson." Something shifted in her voice. "He hit me." "I know." Something moved across his expression. "That's my fault, and I am genuinely sorry for that. I wasn't asking for an apology." "I know that too." She looked at him, at the vest in his hands, at the silver in his hair, at the face of a man who had spent a decade and a half convincing an entire small town that he was nothing more complicated than a bar owner who fixed broken chairs and remembered birthdays. "Who were you?" she asked. "Before all this?" Jackson looked down at the vest. Then he looked back at her with the expression of a man who had been waiting for that question for a very long time and had never quite decided what he would say when it finally arrived. "Someone else," he said. "And then I got tired of being him." He carried the vest back around the bar and set it in the cabinet and closed the latch. He locked it, put the key in his pocket, and knelt down to start collecting the bills from the floor. Outside, the motorcycles began to start up, one by one, filling the cold night with the low, heavy music of 3 dozen engines warming up in the dark. And Madison Carter, cheek-burning hands still faintly shaking, got down on one knee to help him pick up the money. The next morning, Madison woke up at 6:43 to the sound of Lily asking for cereal and the smell of her mother's coffee already going in the kitchen. She lay on the fold-out couch in her mother's living room. She had not wanted to drive home alone after midnight. Her mother had not argued, just pulled out the blankets and asked no questions. She stared at the water stain on the ceiling and thought about the sound of 37 motorcycles starting up in a parking lot in the dark. She had not told her mother what happened. She would have to, eventually. Her mother, Carol, was not the kind of woman you could hide things from indefinitely. She had raised 2 daughters alone after Madison's father left, had worked as a school secretary for 22 years, and had developed over those decades a particular sensitivity to the exact way her youngest daughter's voice changed when something was wrong. She would know. She probably already knew. But she was giving Madison the morning, which was a kind of grace Madison appreciated more than she could say. Lily padded into the room in her socks and stood at the foot of the couch. "Mommy, why did you sleep here?" "I got home too late to drive to our house, baby, so I stayed here." "Did you work a lot?" "I worked a lot." Lily considered this with the seriousness of a 6-year-old processing information she only half understood. "Did your boss make you work a lot?" "No," Madison said. "My boss is good." Lily nodded like that settled something important, turned around and went back to her cereal. Madison lay there another minute. Then she touched the side of her face where Cole Grayson had hit her. The bruise had set overnight. She had seen it in her mother's bathroom mirror when she got up at 3 in the morning and could not go back to sleep. A crescent of purple along her left cheekbone, already yellowing slightly at the edges. She had held a cold cloth to it for 20 minutes. It had not helped much. Some things you just had to let work through their process. She got up, washed her face with cold water, and went to work. Jackson was already there when she arrived. He was behind the bar with 2 cups of coffee and a legal pad covered in his handwriting, and he was on the phone with someone he addressed as Sergeant Briggs. She stopped at the door and listened long enough to understand that he was doing what he had promised to do, making a formal statement, getting the process started in a way that went on the record. He hung up and looked at her. "You didn't have to come in," he said. "I needed the hours." Madison. "I'm fine, Jackson. The bruise looks worse than it feels." She came behind the bar and picked up one of the coffees. "Was that the sheriff's department?" "Detective. He's coming in this afternoon." "What did you tell him?" "All of it." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Including the part where 37 bikes showed up in your parking lot?" "Including that." "How'd they take it?" "About how you'd expect." He paused. Sergeant Briggs is a complicated man. He's not corrupt. He's not going to bury this, but his world is organized in a very specific way, and last night doesn't fit neatly into the shape of it. He'll work it. He just needs time to decide where the edges are. "And where are the edges for you?" Jackson drank his coffee. "Still figuring that out." That was the most honest thing she had ever heard him say about anything personal. For a moment they just stood in the early morning quiet of an empty bar that still smelled faintly of spilled beer and broken glass. And the weight of the previous night settled between them, like something that needed to be named before it could be moved. "The men on the bikes," Madison said. "They left last night, just like that. That's how it works. But they'd come back, if you needed them, if I asked. And do you ever not ask when you need to?" Jackson set down his cup. He looked at the locked cabinet. "When I left," he said, "I told myself I was done asking, done being part of something that required that kind of answer to every problem. It felt like the only honest thing I could do." He was quiet for a moment. "Last night was the first time in 15 years I made that call." "What changed?" He looked at her. "You did." She opened her mouth and closed it again. That was not the answer she had been expecting, and the directness of it settled somewhere she was not sure what to do with. "I'm not worth 15 years of decisions," she said. "That's not what I mean. I mean—" He stopped, thought for a moment. What changed was watching someone refuse to back down when backing down was the rational choice. That did something to me. I have been running this bar by telling myself that keeping a low profile was the same as keeping the peace. Last night made me understand they are not the same thing. Madison looked at the cabinet. "What's in there?" she asked, "besides the vest?" Jackson said nothing for a moment. Then he unlocked the cabinet. He opened it fully this time, turning so she could see inside. The vest was folded neatly on one side. Beside it was a photograph, faded at the edges, of a group of young men standing in front of motorcycles in a desert somewhere. Young men who had the kind of youth that already looked temporary even in the moment, like they knew it would not last. She could pick out Jackson immediately, even 30 years younger, even in the flat colors of an old photograph. He had the same quality of stillness. Beside the photograph was a small stack of papers held together with a rubber band. "Names," Jackson said, "of people in this county who have been paying Cole Grayson for at least 2 years. I have been collecting them. Every business owner who let something slip. Every person who came in here and ordered a drink and said too much not knowing I was listening." He looked at the stack of papers. "Sergeant Briggs is getting a copy of that list this afternoon." She stared at him. "You've had this for 2 years." "Parts of it for 2 years. I've been adding to it." "Why didn't you go to the police before?" "Because I needed it to be complete," he said. "An incomplete list is a way of protecting the people who aren't on it yet. Give law enforcement half a picture and Cole moves the half they can't see." "And now?" Now it's complete enough. She absorbed that. There was a particular kind of patience in what Jackson had done. The patient, methodical work of a man who had spent years watching and waiting for the right moment. It was both impressive and maddening. Impressive because of the discipline it required, maddening because the right moment had apparently arrived in the form of someone hitting her across the face. "Next time," she said, "you could tell me when something like this is building." "You're right," he said. No argument, no qualifier. "I'm serious." "I know, you're right. I'm sorry." She nodded once, picked up her coffee, and that was that. The Iron Horse Tavern opened at 11 on Fridays. By 11:30, the first regulars were at the bar, and by noon it was clear that word had already moved through Redwood Falls the way news moved through a town of 7,000. Not on phones or social media, not formally, but in the way a current moved underwater, invisible on the surface, but strong enough to carry things. Ray Kowalski came in at noon. He sat at his usual stool and did not order anything for a full minute, which was not like him at all. Madison looked at him. He had the look of a man who had been rehearsing something and had just realized the rehearsal was not going to help. "You don't have to," she started. "Let me," he said. "I know I should have moved faster. I know I should have done something before it got where it got. I sat there and watched those men come in, and I did the math, and the math said there was nothing I could do. I don't know if the math was right or wrong because I never found out." He looked down at the bar. "But I've been thinking about it since midnight, and I want you to know that sitting on that stool was the worst I felt about myself in a very long time." She looked at him for a moment. Then she refilled his water glass and set it in front of him. "You stood up," she said. "Too late maybe, but you stood up, and you didn't leave. You stayed in that room when the smart thing would have been to find a reason to go to the bathroom and climb out a window." She held eyes. "That counts, Ray. More than you know." He pressed his lips together, nodded once, and then he ordered his Budweiser and his meatloaf sandwich, and did not say anything else about the night before. And that was right, too. By 2 in the afternoon, Darlene Hutchins came back in, not for a drink. She was sober and dressed for her vacation, luggage visible through the bar window in the back of her car, but she had come to leave a card on the bar. Madison opened it after she left. Inside, in careful handwriting, it said, "I should have done more. I'll be better. Safe travels to you." Underneath that, she had left a $40 tip. The card went up behind the bar where Jackson put the things he wanted to keep. Sergeant Briggs arrived at 3:15. He was a man in his mid-50s with a cop's posture and a cop's habit of entering rooms like he was taking inventory. He sat down with Jackson in the corner booth and they talked for an hour and 40 minutes. Madison did not try to listen, but she caught pieces of it over the course of the afternoon. Cole Grayson's name, the list of businesses, a number she did not recognize, and a name she did. Harmon, which was the name of the county commissioner whose re-election signs was still up on Main Street. That name made her stop what she was doing and hold very still. She looked at Jackson across the bar. He was looking back at her. He gave her the smallest possible nod, the kind that said, "Yes. That. And now you understand why it took 2 years." She went back to work. After Briggs left, Jackson came behind the bar and worked alongside her for the Friday dinner rush. He did not talk about the meeting, and she did not ask. They moved around each other with the practiced ease of people who had been working the same space for 2 years and knew each other's rhythms without needing to announce them. At 7, a man she had never seen came in and sat at the far end of the bar. He was in his mid-50s, lean and weathered, with a particular way of holding himself that she was beginning to recognize. The settled stillness. The economy of movement. He ordered a Coke. He did not look around the room. He just sat there and drank it and was somehow the most present person in the room without appearing to be. Jackson walked to that end of the bar. The 2 men exchanged about 40 words. At the end of it, the man finished his Coke, put a 20 on the bar, and left. Jackson came back to her end. "Who is that?" she asked. "His name's Miller. He was one of the men in the parking lot last night." "Why did he come back?" "To tell me something." Jackson set down the plates he was carrying. Cole Grayson went to see someone this morning. Before he went home, before he did anything else, he drove directly to a meeting. And the person he met with was not a lawyer. "The commissioner," she said. Jackson looked at her. "I heard the name when you were talking to Briggs. I didn't mean to." He nodded slowly. He did not look angry. He looked like a man recalculating something. Commissioner Dale Harmon, Jackson said. "He has been taking money from Cole's operation for at least 3 years. Not cash payments. It's more complicated than that. Business licenses, permits that don't get red flagged, zoning decisions that happen to benefit certain properties." He paused. Cole went to see him this morning because Cole is scared. And when Cole is scared, the first thing he does is remind his protection that they have a shared interest in keeping things quiet. So Harmon is going to try to suppress whatever Briggs does. He's going to try. Briggs doesn't work for Harmon. He works for the sheriff. But Harmon has enough reach that he can create friction, delay things, lose paperwork, apply pressure in the places where pressure works. So what happens now? Jackson picked up a glass from the drying rack, checked it for spots, and set it back down. "Miller told me something else," he said. "2 of the businesses on my list, the florist on Calhoun Street and the family that runs the dry cleaner on 4th, they have been paying Cole's people for over 4 years." He paused. "The florist is a 63-year-old widow named Greta Sorensen. She has been paying $300 a month because Cole's man told her 4 years ago that her shop would have a fire inspection problem if she didn't." He set the glass down. "She has never told anybody, not her kids, not her friends. She has been waking up every month and going to her cash register and counting out $300 and leaving it in an envelope in a specific spot. And she has been doing it alone, in silence, for 4 years." Madison stopped moving. "How old is she?" 63. "And she's been alone with that for 4 years." "Yes." She felt something move through her that was not quite anger and not quite grief. Something in between. The particular, specific weight of understanding how much silent damage could be done by people who relied on silence as their most effective weapon. Greta Sorensen, 63 years old, running her flower shop, cutting stems, arranging bouquets, and every single month counting out $300 and putting it in an envelope and handing over a piece of herself to keep everything quiet. "I want to talk to her," Madison said. "I thought you might. Not for Briggs, not for the investigation, just me. I want to talk to her." "I know," Jackson said. "I'll set it up." The next hour passed in the ordinary rhythm of a Friday night at a bar. Orders and pours and cleared plates and the background hum of other people's conversations. But underneath it, Madison was turning something over in her mind. A thought that had been forming since that morning on the couch in her mother's living room and was only now taking a clear shape. She had thought when she chose not to open the register the night before that she was doing it for Lily, for the work that had built her small life, for the refusal to let anyone take something that was not theirs to take, and those things were true. But somewhere between then and now she understood something else had been working underneath them. She had done it for Greta Sorensen, not Greta specifically. She had not known about Greta until 20 minutes ago. But the idea of Greta, every person who had ever counted out money they could not afford and put it in an envelope and stayed quiet because the alternative felt too large and too dangerous and too alone. She had not opened that register because she was tired of watching people believe they had no choice. At 9:30, one of the kitchen staff came out front and told Jackson someone was at the back door asking to speak with him. Not a delivery, not a regular. A woman middle-aged who had given the name Carrie Dunn. Jackson set down what he was doing immediately. "I know that name," Madison said. "You might." He was already moving toward the back. "She's a city council member, 3rd term. She voted against Harmon's last budget proposal." "That means she's not his." "Come on," Jackson said over his shoulder. They went to the back together. Carrie Dunn was a compact woman with close-cropped gray hair and the brisk, purposeful energy of someone who spent her life solving problems in rooms that did not want to be solved. She looked at Madison when they walked in, then at Jackson, then at the bruise on Madison's cheek. Her expression moved through several things in quick succession. "I heard what happened last night," she said. "I want to help." Jackson looked at her carefully. "Who told you?" Word moves fast in a town this small, especially when it involves Dale Harmon's name. She paused. "I have been watching what Harmon has been doing for 2 years. I have my own documentation. Nothing as complete as what I understand you have, but it corroborates from a different angle." She held Jackson's eyes. "I also know that Sergeant Briggs is a good cop who is about to have his investigation blocked at the county level unless someone builds a wall around it fast." "What kind of wall?" Jackson said. "The legal kind. I have a relationship with the state attorney general's office. If this goes through them, instead of through county channels, Harmon cannot touch it." Jackson and Madison looked at each other. "Why are you doing this?" Madison asked. Carrie turned to look at her directly. "Because Greta Sorensen has been my friend for 30 years, and I have known for 8 months that something was wrong with her, and I could not figure out what." She stopped, took a breath. "And last month she told me she was thinking about closing the shop." She paused. "She has loved that shop for 22 years. She would not close it for any ordinary reason." The room was very quiet. "I figured it out 2 weeks ago," Carrie continued. "I did not have proof yet. I was still trying to put the pieces together when I heard what happened here last night." She looked at Jackson. "You have the list." "I have the list." "Then let me make the call to the AG's office tonight, before Cole has time to talk to Harmon and before Harmon has time to start making things disappear." Jackson did not answer immediately. He looked at Carrie Dunn the way he looked at everything, with the careful patience of a man who took people at their word exactly once and used the first impression to set the foundation of everything that came after. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" "A copy of the list," she said, "and your statement in writing. Tonight. You'll have it by 11. Carrie nodded. She turned to leave. Then she stopped and looked back at Madison. "You're the bartender," she said. "The one who didn't open the register?" "Yes." Carrie looked at her for a moment, not with the soft admiration that people sometimes used when they wanted to be kind without saying anything real, with something more specific. The look of a woman who had spent decades in rooms where refusing to back down was treated as a complication to be managed. "Good," she said, and then she left. After she was gone, Jackson leaned against the wall and let out a long, slow breath. "Is she who she says she is?" Madison asked. "Yes." "And you trust her?" "Enough." He looked at the ceiling. "This is moving faster than I planned." "Is that bad?" "It's not bad. It's just—" He paused. "When things move fast, you lose control of the shape of them. Things happen in the wrong order. People don't have time to prepare." "People like Greta Sorensen," Madison said. He nodded. "She has to know it's coming," Madison said, "before the investigation goes official, before it becomes something with her name attached. She has to hear it from someone first. Someone who's not a cop or a lawyer." "I know. Let me be the one to tell her." Jackson looked at her. "Why?" "Because she's going to be scared," Madison said simply. "And scared people need someone who has been scared too." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'll call her husband. Get you a time tomorrow morning." They went back out to the bar. The Friday night crowd had not noticed they were gone. The jukebox was playing something old and country. Ray Kowalski's stool was empty. He had paid and left around 8, right on schedule. 2 booths were still full of people who were not in any hurry. At 10, a man came in wearing a heavy jacket and sat at the bar and ordered black coffee. Madison had never seen him before. He was maybe 40, with a careful way of not drawing attention to himself that paradoxically made him very noticeable. He waited until she came to refill his cup. Then he said quietly, without looking at her, "Tell Jackson that Cole made 2 calls this afternoon. One was to Harmon. The other was to someone in Missoula." She felt the floor shift slightly under her. "What's in Missoula?" she asked. The man wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. Leverage, he said. And he did not say anything else. He finished his coffee, left cash on the bar, and walked out. Madison stood behind the bar and stared at the door for 3 seconds. Then she turned and looked at Jackson at the far end of the counter. He was already watching her. She walked to him and said it quietly. Cole made 2 calls, one to Harmon, one to Missoula. The man said leverage. Jackson's expression did not change on the surface, but she had watched his face long enough to read the fine print. Something tightened around his eyes, something recalculated behind them. "What's in Missoula?" she asked. Jackson set his glass down very carefully. "Someone who knows things about my past," he said. "Things that could complicate the narrative if they became public at the wrong moment." "What kind of things?" He looked at her steadily. "The kind that would make a good man look like a threat instead of a witness. The kind that would give Harmon something to point at when he tries to discredit the list." He paused. "Cole is smarter than I gave him credit for." "Then we get ahead of it," Madison said. "How?" "You tell Carrie Dunn tonight, before Cole's person in Missoula tells anyone else. If it comes from you first, it's context. If it comes from them first, it's a scandal." Jackson looked at her. "When did you get so good at this?" She thought about Lily asking why she had slept on the couch. She thought about Greta Sorensen counting $300 in silence for 4 years. She thought about what it felt like to stand behind a bar with a hand around your wrist and the full, cold understanding that nobody in the room was going to move for you. "I have been getting good at this my whole life," she said. "You just weren't watching." Jackson made the call to Carrie Dunn at 10:45. Madison stood close enough to hear Carrie's voice on the other end, calm and organized, already 3 steps ahead of the problem. By 11, Carrie had a name and a strategy. By 11:15, she had made a call to someone in the AG's office that could not be walked back. At 11:30, Madison wiped down the last tables. At 11:47, the same time she had realized the night before that Cole Grayson's crew had walked in, she put on her coat and picked up her bag. Jackson was behind the bar, on the phone again with someone she did not know. She knocked twice on the wood. He looked up. She pointed at the door. "Going home." He nodded. "Be safe." She went out into the cold Montana night. The parking lot was empty and quiet. Just her car and the crunching sound of frost under her shoes and the stars over the mountains. They were so dense out here they looked like something you could reach up and disrupt with your hand. She sat in her car for a minute before starting the engine. She thought about Carrie Dunn saying "good" the way only a woman who understood the real cost of not backing down could say it. She thought about the locked cabinet with its faded patches and its photograph and its stack of names. She thought about Cole Grayson's face in the exact moment 37 motorcycles cut their engines in the parking lot. The precise instant when a man who had spent years controlling rooms understood that he had walked into the one room he could not control. She started her car and drove home. And in the back of her mind, underneath everything else, was a name she could not shake. Missoula. Whatever was in Missoula was coming, maybe in days, maybe faster. This time she intended to be ready. Greta Sorensen's flower shop smelled like cut stems and cold water and the particular green freshness of things that were alive but would not be for long. Madison had walked past it 100 times over the years without ever going in, the way you walked past places that had no reason to call you until suddenly they did. She pushed the door open at 9 on Saturday morning and heard the small bell above it and stood for a moment in the warmth. Greta was behind the work table. 63 years old, with the careful, practiced hands of someone who had spent decades handling fragile things. She was wrapping stems in brown paper, and she looked up when Madison came in, and her face did something complicated before it settled back into the expression of a shopkeeper greeting a customer. "We're not open for another 30 minutes, she said. Then she stopped. "You're from Jackson's bar." "The girl from Thursday night." "Madison Carter," she said. "Jackson asked me to come." Greta's hand stopped moving. She set down the stem she was holding. She looked at Madison the way a person looked at something they had been dreading for a very long time and had almost started to believe would never come. I was wondering when someone would, she said quietly. Can we sit down? Greta nodded and came around the work table, and they sat across from each other in the small seating area near the front window, where customers looked at arrangement books. And Madison told her everything. Not the diplomatic version. Not the softened version. All of it. Cole Grayson the list, Carrie Dunn, the AG's office, the call that had already been made the night before that could not be walked back. She told her the way she would have wanted to be told herself, which was directly and without the particular cruelty of false gentleness. When she finished, Greta was quiet for a long moment. Her hands were folded in her lap and she was looking at the space between them. Madison waited. 4 years, Greta finally said. I know. Do you know what it is like to carry something like that for 4 years and not tell a single person, not your daughter, not your friends, not... She stopped. She pressed her lips together. I told myself every month that next month I would do something about it. Next month things would be different. I would figure out a way and this would be the last time. She looked up at Madison. After a while you stop being angry about it. That is the worst part. After a while it just becomes part of your life, like a bill, like a utility payment. You just absorb it. That is what they count on, Madison said. I know that now. But knowing it doesn't make the shame any smaller. Greta, Madison leaned forward, listen to me. There is not one single person in this situation who should feel ashamed except Cole Grayson and the people who helped him. Not you, not the other business owners on the list, not one of you. She held the older woman's eyes. You survived. That is what you did. And you are still here. And the shop is still here. And now you have a way out that doesn't cost you anything except a statement. Greta was quiet again. The bell above the door did not ring. The street outside was still early morning empty. How many people are on the list? She asked. Jackson didn't give me a number. But enough, more than enough. People you know almost certainly. Greta nodded slowly. There was something happening in her expression that was hard to watch. Not breaking down, but the very controlled process of a woman who had held herself in a specific shape for a long time, beginning to release that shape deliberately and with full awareness of what it cost. What do I need to do? She said. A statement. Your account of what happened, how it started, how much, how long. Carrie Dunn's contact at the AG's office will reach out to you Monday. Carrie Dunn knows about this. She's the one who opened the door to the AG's office. Greta absorbed that. Something shifted in her face. Carrie has been my friend for 30 years, she said. She looked me in the eye last month when I told her I was thinking about closing the shop. And she didn't say anything that felt like she knew. She just listened. She didn't push. She was protecting you, Madison said, waiting until she had something real to offer. Greta looked at her hands. She could have just asked me directly. A long pause. Would you have told her? Another pause. No, she said. Not then. She looked up. But I'll tell her now. That was the moment Madison understood something important about the way silent damage worked in a community. It did not just isolate its victims from authority, it isolated them from the people who loved them most. Because love without the ability to act felt worse than ignorance. Carrie Dunn had known something was wrong with her friend for months, and had chosen not to push because she understood that pushing would close a door that needed to open on its own. Madison walked back to the Iron Horse at 9:45 and found Jackson behind the bar with Sergeant Briggs, which was not what she had expected on a Saturday morning. Briggs looked like a man who had not slept. He had his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up and a legal pad in front of him half covered in handwriting. He looked at Madison when she walked in with the expression of a cop who was no longer pretending she was a peripheral figure in whatever was happening. How'd it go? Jackson asked. She's in, Madison said. Monday she'll give her statement. Briggs wrote something on his pad. That makes 9, he said to no one in particular. 9. Madison looked at Jackson. Briggs has been making calls since 6 this morning, Jackson said. Turns out once word got out that the AG's office was involved, the phone started ringing. Who called?
Marcus Webb. He runs the hardware store on Route 9. 14 months.
Donna Park, who owns the Korean restaurant on 5th. 2 brothers who have a landscaping company outside of town. He paused. And a man named Frank Duca, who manages the storage facility out near the highway. Frank Duca, Briggs said. And something in his voice made both Madison and Jackson look at him. That's the one that changes the picture, Briggs said. Why? Madison asked. Briggs looked at Jackson. Jackson gave him a small nod. Because Frank Duca's storage facility is where Cole Grayson has been keeping records, Briggs said. Physical records, paper ledgers. Cole is old-fashioned in ways that people in his business usually are not. He doesn't trust digital. He doesn't trust phones. He keeps books, real books. Names, amounts, dates, all of it. And he keeps them in a storage unit under a name that Frank Duca recognized because Frank is the one who rented it to him. Madison stood very still. If those records exist, she started, then the list Jackson built is corroboration, Briggs said. The records are the primary evidence. A case built on witness statements is solid. A case built on witness statements plus the target's own records is a certainty. He paused. Can you get to them? That's the question. He put his pen down. Getting a warrant takes time, and time is what we don't have a lot of right now because... His phone rang. He looked at it. His expression went flat in the specific way of a man receiving information he had been hoping to avoid. He answered. Said almost nothing, listened for 45 seconds, said when, listened again, said, I'm on my way, and hung up. He stood up and reached for his jacket. Briggs, Jackson said. Cole Grayson was picked up this morning at the county line, Briggs said. Running. He had a bag and he had cash and he was heading south on 93. He ran, Madison said. He ran. And Briggs was already moving toward the door. Which means one of two things. Either he found out about the AG's office and panicked, or someone tipped him. He stopped at the door. He looked at Jackson with an expression that carried a weight Madison felt from across the room. That's what I'm going to find out. Stay here, both of you. Don't talk to anyone you don't already trust. He was gone. Jackson and Madison looked at each other across the empty bar. He ran, she said again. She was turning the fact over, examining it. Does that help us or hurt us? Both, Jackson said. If they hold him, it helps. If he lawyers up fast and a lawyer's talk to Harmon and Harmon talks to someone in the county jail system. He walks, she said. He might, then the records matter more. She sat down on a bar stool. Someone tipped him, she said. Someone who knew enough about the investigation to know the timeline. Someone who received information in the last 12 hours. Who knew about the AG's office call? She asked. Carrie Dunn, the AG's office contact. Briggs, you, and me. That's a short list. It is. Carrie Dunn didn't tip him. No. Briggs didn't tip him. No. So either the AG's office has a problem, she stopped, or the leak isn't from last night. Or the leak is older than we think, Jackson said. Cole might have someone positioned close enough to the county system that they can monitor movement without needing to know specific details. If there was any unusual activity on Briggs's file in the last 24 hours, someone watching the system could have seen the signal even without knowing the content. Madison pressed both hands flat on the bar rail. The same thing she had done the night before when she was trying to stop shaking. Harmon, she said. Harmon has eyes inside the system. Not everywhere, but enough. So Harmon warned Cole. Maybe not directly. Maybe Harmon saw something in the system and made a call to someone who made a call. The chain doesn't have to be short to be connected. Can Briggs prove that? Not yet, Jackson looked at the cabinet. But Harmon making a call to someone in Cole's network at the same time Cole decided to run would be interesting to a prosecutor. He paused. Briggs has Cole's phone records in the warrant he filed this morning. If those records show a call from a number connected to Harmon between midnight and 6 this morning, the chain gets very short very fast. They sat with that for a moment. Then Jackson's phone rang. He looked at it. His face did something she had not seen it do before, something that moved through his controlled stillness like a current under ice. "It's Miller," he said. He answered, listened, said, "How long ago?" Listened again, said, "I understand," and hung up. He set the phone on the bar. "The person from Missoula," he said. "They're already here." She had known it was coming. She had said as much to herself driving home the night before. But hearing it land in real time, in the flat daylight of a Saturday morning, with everything else already in motion, was different from anticipating it in the dark. "Here as in Redwood Falls," she said. "Checked into the motel on Route 9 last night. Miller's man recognized him this morning." Jackson was still and focused in a way that read to anyone who knew him as a person making a decision. "His name is Dennis Cahill. He's a journalist, or he calls himself one. He writes for an investigative blog out of Missoula that specializes in what he calls exposing vigilante justice in Montana. He's done pieces on biker communities before, sympathetic to law enforcement, hostile to anything that looks like organized civilian action." "What does he have on you?" Jackson was quiet for a moment. 15 years ago, he said. "Before I left the club, there was an incident. A man was hurt, not killed but badly hurt, and the circumstances were complicated. The investigation was closed without charges because the evidence was genuinely ambiguous, and the men involved were genuinely acting in defense of someone who needed defending." He paused. "But an ambiguous closed investigation looks like a cover-up to someone who has already decided what the story is. And Cahill has already decided. Cole sent him files. Miller's man saw him with them at the motel. Photographs, documents, things that were supposed to be sealed." He looked at her steadily. "If Cahill publishes before the case against Cole goes formal, the story becomes not extortion ring broken, but biker vigilante with violent past manipulates law enforcement. And Harmon gets to stand in front of a camera and say the investigation is compromised. What happens to the list? The list survives legally, but in the court of public opinion, the list becomes a biker gang's revenge campaign against a small businessman. 9 witnesses who suddenly have to defend their association with an organized crime-adjacent figure instead of being seen as victims." Madison stood up. "Then we need to talk to Cahill first," she said. Jackson looked at her. "I'm serious. Before he files whatever he's planning to file. If the story he has is one-sided, the way to undercut it isn't to hide from it. It's to give him a better story." She looked at him directly. "What happened 15 years ago? The truth of it. Does it hold up?" "It holds up. The man who was hurt was trying to..." He stopped. "A young woman was in danger. The response was disproportionate by some measures, but it was real, and it was the only reason anyone moved." "Then that is the story," she said. "A man who used to do hard things learned to do better ones. A community that needed protecting and had no other options. 9 business owners who have been paying for silence for years and finally have someone in their corner." She paused. "That is a better story than what Cahill has. And the only way he gets it is if someone gives it to him. You want to walk into that motel and sit down with a journalist who has been hired to destroy the narrative we need? I want to walk into that motel and sit down with a journalist who wants a real story," she said. "There's a difference." Jackson looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "He'll ask about the club. Then you tell him. He'll ask about the incident. Then you tell him that too. Madison, if this goes wrong, if we do nothing, it goes wrong anyway," she said. "At least this way we're choosing the shape of it." She watched him decide. She could see the exact moment it happened. A specific settling in him like a building accepting its own foundation. "Give me 20 minutes, he said. He went to the back office. She heard him on the phone. Not Miller this time, Carrie Dunn. And then someone else she did not recognize. When he came back out, he had a piece of paper in his hand with a number on it and the expression of a man who had made peace with an uncomfortable choice. "Carrie's lawyer is going to be on standby," he said. "Anything Cahill publishes without our cooperation, we respond to within the hour. Anything he publishes with our cooperation." He paused. We'll have shaped it enough that it helps instead of hurts." "Okay," she said. They drove to the Route 9 motel in Jackson's truck. Madison had never been to it, though she had passed it thousands of times. A long, low building painted the same shade of beige since approximately 1987, with a half-empty parking lot and a vending machine visible through the office window. 3 cars in the lot, one of them a rental, Montana plates, rental sticker on the back bumper. "Room 7, Jackson said. "Miller's information." They knocked. Dennis Cahill opened the door on the second knock, which told her he had been expecting either them or someone like them. He was 41 or 42, with a specific kind of tired that was not about sleep deprivation, but about spending a career looking at things that did not get better. He was holding a coffee from the gas station across the highway, and he looked at them both with a journalist's quality of flattened expectation. The look of someone who had learned to be surprised by nothing. He looked at Jackson. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said. "Can we come in?" Jackson said. A pause. Then Cahill stepped back. The room had the quality of a space where someone had been working. Papers on the small desk, a laptop open, 2 empty coffee cups from earlier in the day. He moved the papers into a stack, without hiding them but also without displaying them, his own kind of practiced neutrality. They all sat down. "Who sent you?" Jackson asked. "That's not something I share." "Cole Grayson is in custody as of about an hour ago," Jackson said. "So whoever you're protecting has a shorter shelf life than they think." Cahill's expression did not change dramatically, but something in it recalibrated. He had not known about the arrest. That was information. "In custody for what?" he asked. "Attempted flight. There'll be more charges by Monday." Jackson folded his hands. "Which means your story, whatever version he sold you, is going to look like a favor to a man who just ran from an extortion investigation." "Or," Cahill said, "my story is about how a former enforcer manipulated local law enforcement into running an operation that—" "His name is Jackson Walker," Madison said. "He has owned a bar in this town for 16 years. He has paid his employees above minimum wage for 16 years. He has never been charged with anything in this county." She paused. "And on Thursday night, he walked into his own bar to protect an employee from being assaulted and a register from being robbed. That is the story you are in town to cover." Cahill looked at her. "And you are the employee who was assaulted." He looked at her cheek. The bruise was still visible. "Cole Grayson's man did that?" he asked. "Cole Grayson did it personally," she said, "in front of 4 witnesses who will all tell you the same thing." Cahill set down his coffee. "I was given documentation suggesting Walker has a violent history with—" "He has a history," Jackson said. "I am not here to tell you otherwise. I am here to tell you what it means and what it does not mean. And if that is not interesting to you, that is fine. But if you publish the version Cole sold you, you are going to spend the next year issuing corrections. Because 9 business owners in this town are going to give statements to the state AG's office in the next 72 hours, and when that case goes public, anyone who was on Cole's side of the story is going to have to explain why." Cahill looked at both of them. He picked up his coffee again. "9 witnesses," he said. 9 so far. And the AG's office already involved. Call them if you want to verify." A long quiet. She could see him working through it, the shape of what he had been given versus the shape of what was actually in front of him. A journalist's real instinct, when it was working the way it was supposed to, was not to protect a narrative. It was to find the real one. She was betting that Cahill's instinct was still working right. "What happened 15 years ago?" he said. He was looking at Jackson now, not her. Jackson held his eyes. A 19-year-old girl from Laurel was being held in a house by 2 men who had been running her for 7 months, he said. Law enforcement in that county knew about the situation and had done nothing for 11 weeks because one of the men had a familial connection to someone in the department. We went in and got her out. One of the men was hurt in the process. The investigation was closed and I was never charged because what we did was technically defensible and practically necessary. He paused. The man who was hurt has since been convicted of 2 separate trafficking offenses in Wyoming. If you want his name, I'll give it to you. Cahill was very still. That is not what my documentation says, he said slowly. What does your documentation say? It says the victim was collateral damage in a territory dispute. A silence. Cole told you that, Jackson said. The documentation was prepared by Cole's people to look like something it isn't. The girl's name is Amanda Rohr, Madison said. She lives in Bozeman now. She is 34 years old. She has a daughter and a job, and she knows exactly who came into that house 15 years ago. She looked at Cahill directly. Call her. Another silence, this one longer. Do you have a number? Cahill asked. I can get one, Jackson said. Give me 2 hours. Cahill looked at them. Something had shifted in the room, not dramatically, not a complete turnaround, but the particular shift of a person who had arrived with a hammer and just discovered the thing they had been sent to break was made of something different than they thought. I'm not promising anything, he said. I'm not asking for a promise, Jackson said. I'm asking you to make one phone call before you file anything. That's all. Cahill looked at his laptop, at the stack of papers he had moved to the side. 2 hours, he said. They drove back to the bar, mostly in silence. Halfway there, Madison said, Amanda Rohr, can you reach her? I reached her 20 minutes before we knocked on that door, Jackson said. She is the second call I made in the back office. She looked at him. She said yes, Madison asked. She said she had been waiting for someone to ask her for 15 years. Jackson said it without drama. The way he said everything, flat, plain. The way a person spoke when they had moved past the need to perform their feelings about something. But she heard what was underneath it. Not relief exactly. Something older than relief. She looked out the window at the highway and the mountains and the particular cold, clear light of a Montana October morning. And she thought about a 19-year-old girl waiting in a house for 11 weeks while the people who were supposed to help her looked the other way. And she thought about the people who had finally come. And she thought about how the story of that night had been buried under the wrong version for 15 years, sitting in a file that Cole Grayson had weaponized without ever understanding what it actually said about the man he was trying to destroy. They pulled into the bar parking lot. Jackson's phone rang before he turned the engine off. He looked at it and picked up. It was Briggs. He listened for 30 seconds, said when, listened again, and then his expression did something she had no reference for. A kind of opening, like a fist releasing something it had been holding too long. He hung up. Cole's lawyer arrived 40 minutes ago, he said. Cole spent 20 minutes with him and then told the lawyer he wanted to make a deal. He paused. He's going to talk. Madison sat with that for a moment. He's going to give them Harmon, she said. That's the only deal worth making. She nodded slowly. The mathematics of it were almost elegant in the grim way that certain collapses were elegant. Cole had built his entire operation on the assumption that his protection would. The moment his protection became a liability instead of an asset, the moment Harmon became someone Cole might go to prison protecting rather than someone keeping him out, the calculation changed completely. What happens to Harmon? She asked. Depends on what Cole knows and what he can prove, Jackson said. But Briggs sounded like a man who just watched a door he had been pushing against for 2 years swing open on its own. She got out of the truck. She stood in the parking lot for a moment in the cold air, and she thought about Thursday night, which was now 40-some hours ago, but felt like it belonged to a different week entirely. The register on the floor, the broken glass, 4 people sitting very still in their chairs and making calculations about what they could afford. Jackson, she said. He came around the truck. What you said this morning about calling Miller 3 weeks ago because you knew Cole was coming eventually. She looked at him. Did you know he would come in person Thursday night? No, he said. I expected him to send someone. I didn't expect him to come himself. Why did he? Jackson thought about that. Because I turned him down in person, he said. 3 weeks ago he came to the bar himself. You weren't on shift. He sat at the bar and told me what the arrangement was. And I told him to his face what I thought of it, and he left. He paused. And I think that was the thing he could not let stand.
Not the refusal. The way I looked at him when I refused.
Like he wasn't a threat, she said. Like he wasn't worth being afraid of, Jackson said.
Which turned out to be the most dangerous thing I could have done to his ego.
She understood that perfectly. She had been living with the consequences of exactly that dynamic since Thursday night. Well, she said, his ego got him arrested. It usually does, Jackson said, with men like that. She went inside and made coffee and started the Saturday prep because that was what she did. The story kept going and the bar kept running and the coffee did not make itself. And Greta Sorensen was going to give her statement on Monday. And Dennis Cahill was going to make a phone call to Bozeman. And somewhere in the county jail, Cole Grayson was sitting across from his lawyer, doing the math on how much of Dale Harmon he was willing to sell. At 2 in the afternoon, Cahill called Jackson's cell. Jackson listened for 30 seconds. Then he said, "Thank you," and hung up. He looked at Madison. "He spoke to Amanda," he said, "and he's killing the story Cole gave him." A pause. "He wants to write a different one." She poured coffee into 2 cups and slid one across the bar. "Tell him," she said, "that he can start with Greta Sorensen and her 30-year friend who didn't push when pushing would have made things worse." She picked up her cup. "That's the part of the story most people are going to recognize." Jackson picked up his coffee. "I'll tell him," he said, and the bar filled up the way it always did on Saturday afternoons. One person at a time, each one carrying their own weight of the week into a room that was warm and asked nothing of them except that they sit down. For a few hours, that was enough. The article went live on Wednesday morning at 6:42. Madison was in the middle of her opening prep when her phone started buzzing on the bar counter, one notification after another in quick succession. She picked it up to find 3 text messages from Carrie Dunn, one from her mother, and one from a number she did not recognize, which turned out to be Darlene Hutchins sending a link from whatever vacation destination she had made it to. All of them were pointing at the same thing. She opened the link. Dennis Cahill had titled it, "The Town That Stayed Quiet and the People Who Finally Didn't." She read it standing behind the bar with the coffee still brewing and the chairs still upside down on the tables. It took her 11 minutes. When she finished, she read the first 3 paragraphs again slowly. The way you reread something that landed somewhere you had not expected. Cahill had written it straight, not favorable, not a puff piece, not the rehabilitation story she might have feared it becoming in the other direction. He had written it the way a journalist wrote something when they encountered a situation more complicated than the one they had come to cover and decided the complication was the real story. Greta Sorensen was in the 3rd paragraph. Unnamed but unmistakable to anyone who knew Redwood Falls. The 4 years, the envelope, the monthly arithmetic of a woman keeping her shop alive by paying for the right to exist in her own business. He had written it with a restraint that was more devastating than emotion would have been. Just the facts, just the numbers, just the timeline, and the timeline did all the work that outrage could not. Jackson's past was in paragraph 9. Cahill had not buried it and had not weaponized it. He had written it the way Jackson had told it. The girl in the house in Laurel, the 11 weeks, the closed investigation, the man who had been hurt and who had since collected 2 trafficking convictions in Wyoming. He had included a quote from Amanda Rohr, and the quote was 6 sentences long, and Madison had to stop after reading it and breathe for a moment before she could continue. The article ended with a description of 9 business owners in a county of 7,000 people who had collectively paid more than $400,000 over varying periods of time to a protection operation that had been running under the awareness, if not the direct management, of an elected county commissioner. It named Dale Harmon. It was careful with its language the way journalists were careful when they were certain of something they could not yet fully prove in print. But the shape of what it implied was not ambiguous. Madison set her phone down. She turned around and finished making the coffee. At 7:15, Jackson came in through the back. He had seen it. She could tell by the particular quality of his silence when he came behind the bar. Not the ordinary morning quiet. the silence of a man processing something he had been anticipating and still found surprising when it arrived. "Cahill did right by it," she said. "He did," Jackson said. Amanda's quote. "I know." Jackson stopped. There were things she wanted to say about Amanda Rohr's 6 sentences and what it meant that a 34-year-old woman in Bozeman had been carrying a phone number for 15 years, waiting for someone to call it. But those things did not have clean edges yet, and so she said, "It's going to move fast today." "Already is," he said. He put his phone on the bar. She could see the screen, missed calls, a string of texts. The state AG's office put out a statement at 7. They're confirming an active investigation. They didn't name Harmon directly, but they said the investigation encompasses both private criminal activity and potential public corruption. He paused. Harmon's office issued a response at 7:08, saying the commissioner intends to cooperate fully with any legitimate inquiry. "Cooperate fully," she said. The language of a man whose lawyer told him to buy time, and Cole is still talking. Briggs called at 6:30. Cole gave them 3 things last night that they didn't have before. A bank account in Billings where the premiums were consolidated, the name of a man in the county permits office who had been flagging business license renewals for Cole to use as pressure points, and a date. She looked at him. "What date?" "The date Harmon's people first made contact with Cole's operation." He set the cup down. 2019. And Cole has text messages, old ones from a phone he kept in the storage unit with the ledgers. He had been keeping them as insurance. Insurance against Harmon. In case Harmon ever tried to cut him loose. Cole kept records to protect himself from his own protection, she said. And the records are what's going to bury him. That's usually how it goes, Jackson said. The thing a person builds to protect themselves becomes the thing that traps them. By 9 in the morning, the bar had 4 customers who had come in not for breakfast, but for information because word had a way of creating gravity. And the Iron Horse Tavern was the center of whatever gravity was operating in Redwood Falls that Wednesday. Madison served coffee and said less than she knew, which was the only sane policy, and listened to 4 different versions of the Cahill article being discussed at the bar, like a text being interpreted by people with competing translations. Ray Kowalski came in at 9:30. He sat at his stool and he looked at Madison and then at the bruise on her face, which was fading now. The purple going greenish at the edges, the way bruises went when they were moving toward done. "I read it," he said. "A lot of people read it," she said. "Greta Sorensen." He said the name quietly. "I've been buying flowers from that woman for 20 years. Bought my wife's birthday flowers there every March. Had no idea." He shook his head. 4 years. He pressed his hand flat on the bar. "She okay?" "She's going to be okay," Madison said. "She's not alone with it anymore. That's the biggest part." Ray nodded. He sat with his coffee and he was quiet for a while. And then he said, without looking up, "I keep thinking about Thursday night. About sitting on that stool. Ray, just let me say it." He looked up. "I've been sitting on that stool for 8 years. Every Thursday I tell myself I'm a decent man. I work hard. I show up when people need me. I don't look the other way when things are wrong. And then something actually happened. And I did the exact thing I've spent my whole life telling myself I wasn't the kind of person to do." He held her eyes. "How do you live with knowing that about yourself?" Madison looked at him for a moment. She thought about the calculations she had watched him make in real time. The wide shoulders, the reddening face, the standing up and the sitting back down. "You find out what you're made of in the moments that matter," she said. "And then you decide what you're going to do with that information." She held his eyes. "You stood up twice. The second time you didn't sit back down until it was over. Most people don't stand up at all." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and went back to his coffee. At 10:15, the door opened and a woman walked in who Madison had never seen. She was in her early 40s with the precise, organized energy of someone who lived by a schedule and expected the schedule to be respected. She walked directly to Madison. "I'm looking for Jackson Walker," she said. He's in the back. Can I ask what it's about? My name is Helen Park. I'm with the State Attorney General's office. I called ahead. He should be expecting me. Madison went to the back and found Jackson on the phone. He saw her face and said into the phone, "I'll call you back," and hung up. Helen Park, Madison said. He was already moving. She's early. Is that bad? It means they're moving faster than I expected, he said, which means they have more than they need for the warrants, and now they're building the case rather than still gathering it. He paused at the door. That's good. That's exactly what we need. But he did not look entirely settled about it, and she noted that. She went back to the bar. Helen Park had chosen the corner booth, the one that faced the door, and she had a slim leather case on the table in front of her, with the posture of a woman who had conducted 3 of these meetings before lunch many times. Jackson slid in across from her. Madison stayed behind the bar and did not try to listen. But at 11, Jackson came to the bar and said, "She needs a statement from you. You're the direct victim from Thursday night. Everything you witnessed, everything Cole said, the register, the physical contact, she needs it formal." Madison took off her apron. She sat down across from Helen Park, who had a recorder and a legal pad and a pen, and the particular focused attention of someone who listened for a living. And Madison told it. The whole thing, the 1147, the 3 men, the way Cole had moved through the bar like he was taking inventory, the register on the floor, Ray standing up and sitting back down, the hand around her wrist, and then the casual, emotionless backhand, the broken glass, the emergency lights. She told it in order and with detail and without embellishment, because embellishment was how stories fell apart under cross-examination. The plainest version of a true thing was the most durable version. Helen Park asked 4 follow-up questions. She wrote something after each answer. Then she said, "You refuse to open the register even after the physical contact." Yes. Why? Madison thought about it. Not because she did not know, but because she wanted to say it in a way that was honest, rather than performed. "Because it wasn't my money to give," she said. "Jackson paid for that register. The people who came to this bar paid for what was in it, and the idea of handing it to someone just because they were willing to hurt me to get it." She paused. "It felt like the one thing I could actually control, so I controlled it." Helen Park wrote something. "And when Mr. Walker arrived," she said, "did he make physical contact with any of Cole Grayson's associates?" "No." "Did he threaten them verbally?" "No. He asked them to leave. They chose to leave voluntarily." A pause. As voluntarily as men leave a parking lot containing 37 motorcycles. Helen Park looked up. Something in her expression moved briefly in a direction that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Fair enough," she said. She clicked her pen. "One more question. The cabinet behind the bar. You witnessed Mr. Walker retrieve a vest from it." "Yes." "Did he do anything with the vest other than hold it out?" "He put it on the bar between himself and Cole Grayson. He did not put it on." "Did he say anything when he took it out?" Cole asked what it was. Jackson said it was a memory and a message. Helen Park wrote that down. "Thank you," she said. "That's everything I need." Madison went back behind the bar. Jackson remained in the booth with Helen Park for another 20 minutes. When he came out, he had the expression of a man who had just handed something heavy to someone else to carry and was not entirely sure how to feel about no longer holding it. "How was that?" Madison asked. "Efficient," he said. "She's very good." "What happens next?" "Harmon gets a formal notification today. Not an arrest, not yet. A formal notice that he's a subject of the investigation. His lawyer will advise him not to speak to anyone and not to access certain records." Jackson came behind the bar and began the prep for the lunch rush, moving through the familiar motions of his own bar the way he always did. Automatic, grounded, almost meditative. And then the waiting starts. How long depends on what Cole gives them and how fast it can be verified. Could be weeks, could be faster. He looked at her. "The storage unit warrant went through this morning. Briggs has a team there right now." She thought about those ledgers, real books, physical paper. Cole Grayson's old-fashioned conviction that digital was less trustworthy than something you could hold in your hands. She thought about the particular irony of a man being brought down by his own belief in the permanence of things written down. "Jackson," she said. "Yeah." "When this is over, when the case is filed and the investigation runs its course and Harmon faces whatever he's going to face, what does that look like for this place?" He considered the question seriously the way he considered everything. "Quieter," he said, "for a while, then louder. There'll be attention, people driving through because they read the article, journalists doing follow-ups. It'll create a kind of gravity that will feel good for a while and then wear off." He dried a glass and set it on the rack. "And then it goes back to being a bar, which is what I want it to be." "Just a bar?" "A good bar," he said, "with a register that stays where it belongs and a back cabinet that stays locked." He paused. "And better locks on the front door." She laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in 5 days, and it surprised her the ease of it, the way it came from somewhere that the previous 5 days had not touched. At 12:40, the lunch rush was in full motion when Carrie Dunn came in. She went directly to Jackson, said something in a low voice, and his expression shifted. He came to Madison's end of the bar when Carrie left. "Harmon resigned," he said. She stared at him. "When?" 20 minutes ago. His office issued a statement. He cited health reasons and the need to focus on personal matters." Jackson set down the plates he was carrying. His lawyer put out a separate statement, saying the commissioner intends to engage constructively with any lawful inquiry. "He ran," she said, "without actually running. He ran the way men in his position run, with a press release and a lawyer, but he's gone. The moment you resign in the middle of an active investigation, you lose the institutional cover. He can't make calls to the sheriff's office from inside county government anymore. He can't flag permits or slow-walk license renewals. Whatever reach he had," he paused. "It just ended." The lunch crowd came and went. Madison worked through it with the particular focused efficiency of someone holding a lot in their head while their hands did something separate and manageable. At 2:15, Greta Sorensen came in. She had not been to the Iron Horse before, or not that Madison could remember. She stood at the door for a moment, looking at the space with the expression of someone coming to a place they had been thinking about but hadn't quite worked up to. Madison waved her in. Greta sat at the bar and ordered tea, which Jackson made without comment. She wrapped both hands around the mug and sat with it for a moment. "I gave my statement this morning," she said. "Helen Park, very thorough woman." "She is," Madison said. "She asked me questions I wasn't expecting. Dates and amounts, those I expected, but she asked me how I felt the first time I put the money in the envelope." "What I was thinking." Greta looked at her tea. "I hadn't thought about that specific moment in years. I'd buried it under all the other months. But when she asked, I remembered exactly. I was standing at my register, and I had the envelope in my hand, and I was thinking, this is the last time. I'll figure something out by next month, and this will be the last time." She looked up. "I said that to myself every month for 4 years." Madison did not say anything. 48 times, Greta said. "I told myself it was the last time. 48 times. She shook her head. "Do you know what the strangest thing is? Now that it is actually over, the thing I feel most is not relief. It is angry. I am angrier than I have been about anything in 20 years. I did not feel the anger while it was happening because the anger felt dangerous. But now," she stopped. "Now there is nothing left to be afraid of, and all the anger that had nowhere to go is just..." She pressed her hand flat on the bar, the same gesture Madison had watched Ray make that morning. "Good," Madison said. Greta looked at her. "That anger belongs to you," Madison said. "You earned it, every cent of it. It means you are done absorbing something you never should have had to absorb." She held the older woman's eyes. "Use it. Give your statement and use the anger, and don't talk yourself out of feeling it because it's uncomfortable." Greta looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Jackson told me what you did Thursday night. The register." "Jackson talks too much." "No, he doesn't. He almost never talks." Greta wrapped her hands tighter around the mug. "He told me because he wanted me to understand something. He said she didn't open it because she knew someone needed her not to, even if she didn't know who that someone was yet." She looked at Madison. "Did you know that—" Madison thought about Lily asking if she'd worked a lot. She thought about the envelope day and Greta counting $300 in silence 48 times. She thought about what she had actually been refusing when she refused to open that register. Whether she could have named it in the moment, or whether it had been something she understood only afterward. The way you sometimes understood what you had been doing only in the light of what it turned out to mean. "I knew something," she said. "I didn't know what to call it yet." Greta nodded. She drank her tea. She stayed for 40 minutes, which was longer than she had planned, and she and Madison talked about things that had nothing to do with investigations or articles or storage units. About Lily's preference for orange juice over apple. About the particular challenge of keeping carnations alive through a Montana winter. About the small, ordinary facts of two women's lives that existed completely outside the shape of the last 5 days. When Greta left, she hugged Madison at the door. It was the kind of hug that said more than the conversation had, which was exactly how Greta meant it. At 4, Briggs called Jackson. Madison was close enough to hear Jackson's end. "All of it," Jackson said. A pause. "Every account." Another pause. "And the dates match the permit records." A longer pause. "Does Helen Park know?" A short pause. "Okay." He looked at Madison while still on the phone. "One more thing. The man in the county permits office, the one Cole named?" He listened, nodded once. "All right, thank you." He put the phone down. "The ledgers," he said. $412,000 over 5 years. 41 businesses, not 9, 41. She stared at him. 41, she said. The 9 who came forward were the ones willing to speak quickly. The ledgers have 41 businesses. Some of them are in neighboring counties. Cole had spread farther than I knew. He leaned on the bar. And the permits office contact, a man named Gary Stills, was arrested at his home an hour ago. The scale of it was difficult to hold all at once. 41 businesses. She tried to build a map of it in her head. The hardware store, the flower shop, the Korean restaurant, the landscaping brothers, Frank Duca in his storage unit. Multiply that by 5. Multiply it by the monthly arithmetic of every one of them convincing themselves next month would be different. $412,000. The AG's office is going to use the ledgers to reach out to the businesses that haven't come forward yet, Jackson said. They won't have to give statements if they're not ready. The ledgers are the primary evidence, but they'll have the option. Some of them have been carrying this for 5 years, Madison said. Some of them are going to feel what Greta felt this morning. Yeah, she looked at him. The bar, she said. Can this be the place where people come when they need to be somewhere that is not a lawyer's office and not their own house with their own thoughts? Can this be the place where someone sits across from them and says, "Tell me how you felt the first time," like Helen Park did, but without the legal pad? Jackson looked at her for a long moment. You do that, he said. I already started, she said, with Greta. He nodded slowly. Then yes, he said, this can be that place. At 5:30, the bar filled up the way it did on weekday evenings, steadily 1 or 2 at a time. The after-work crowd that came to decompress and be around people without necessarily talking to them. It felt more like itself than it had all week. The ordinary, imperfect, necessary thing that it was. A place where people came because going home to silence was sometimes the harder option. Ray Kowalski came in at 6, not his usual Thursday timing. He sat at his stool and ordered his Budweiser. And then he did something he had never done in 8 years of Thursday nights. He looked at Madison and said, "Tell me about your daughter." She blinked. "What, Lily?" Jackson mentioned her once a while back. "You've got a 6-year-old?" "Yeah." she said, surprised by the warmth that moved through her at the question. "I do." "What's she like?" So she told him, not because the evening required it or the moment demanded it, but because Ray Kowalski was a man who had spent 48 hours sitting with something uncomfortable about himself and had come to the bar not to forget it, but to be better than it. And the way he had chosen to be better was to start paying attention to the person he had failed to pay attention to when it mattered. She told him about Lily and the nightlight and the orange juice and the way she said probably when she meant maybe and had for 2 full years despite every gentle correction. She told him about the medical bills and the double shifts and the way Lily had once told her teacher that her mom was a superhero because she could carry 6 plates at once. Ray laughed. The real kind. 6 plates, he said. She's not wrong, Madison said. And somewhere in that exchange, in the ordinary Saturday rhythm of people and drinks and small conversations, something settled. Not resolved. Resolution was going to take months, in courtrooms and press releases and depositions, and the slow, grinding work of accountability that rarely arrived in a single dramatic moment. But settled in the way things settled when the ground stopped moving, when you could finally feel that you were standing on something solid. Jackson locked the cabinet at closing time without ceremony. He had done it every night for 16 years, and he did it the same way now. Key from his pocket latch, turned key back in his pocket. But when he looked at Madison across the bar, something in the look was different from every look before Thursday night. Not warmer. It had always been warm. Clearer. The look of a person who had stopped carrying something alone. "Same time tomorrow," he said. "Same time tomorrow," she said. And she picked up her bag and went out into the cold, and the door closed behind her, and the stars were where they always were. 6 weeks after the night Cole Grayson walked into the Iron Horse Tavern and made the worst decision of his professional life, Madison Carter was wiping down the bar at 11:15 on a Thursday when Ray Kowalski sat down with his Budweiser and said, "You know what's different about this place now?" She looked at him. "Tell me." "People stay longer," he said. "Used to be folks came in, had their drink, went home. Now they sit. They order another round. They talk to the person next to them they've been sitting next to for 3 years without saying more than hello." He looked around the room. Something changed. Madison looked at the bar. He wasn't wrong. The Thursday crowd was larger than it had been before, and it had a different quality. Not louder exactly, but more present. People leaning in. People laughing in the way that people laughed when something had released a pressure they had not realized was pressing down on them. "Jackson fixed the lighting," she said. Ray gave her a look. "It's not the lighting," he said. "No," she said. "It's not lighting." What it was she thought was the thing that happened to places where people went through something together. Not the dramatic shared experience, not the night itself because most of the Thursday regulars had not been there that Thursday night. But the aftermath, the article, the slow daily accumulation of what the town was working through. People came to the Iron Horse because it was the place at the center of the thing they were trying to understand, and being at the center felt better than being at the edges of it. 3 of the 41 businesses on Cole's ledger had given statements in the 2 weeks after the first 9, then 4 more the week after that. The AG's office had moved with a speed that surprised even Carrie Dunn, who had told Madison privately that she had expected bureaucratic pace to blunt the momentum. But Helen Park had treated momentum like the one resource that could not be reacquired once lost, and she had kept the timeline tight in a way that prevented the kind of slow erosion that usually let cases like this soften before they hardened into charges. Dale Harmon had retained 2 lawyers by the end of the first week. By the end of the second week, he had retained a 3rd, which was the kind of detail that communicated more about a person's situation than any press statement. Cole Grayson had been formally charged on 11 counts including extortion, racketeering, and assault. The assault charge carried Madison Carter's name as the complaining witness, which she had been told in a phone call from Helen Park's office and had sat with for a full 20 minutes before she felt like she could speak normally again. She had not expected her name in a legal document to feel the way it felt. She had expected it to feel like a weight. It felt like the opposite. Like something that had been floating untethered inside her for 6 weeks had been given a place to stand. The formal charges against Harmon were still 2 weeks away, contingent on Cole's cooperation being verified against the documentary evidence from the ledgers and the text messages. But Briggs had told Jackson, and Jackson had told Madison, that the text message trail between Harmon's personal phone and 2 numbers connected to Cole's operation was clear enough that the only remaining question was the count, not the verdict. Harmon was going to be charged. The question was, how many counts? On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the article, Madison arrived at the bar to find Jackson in conversation with a man she recognized but had never spoken to. He was one of the riders who had been in the parking lot that Thursday night. She recognized the vest same as the one in Jackson's cabinet, worn and dark, and carrying the same history. He was in his early 60s with a gray beard and the careful, considered movements of a person who had learned not to make unnecessary ones. Jackson introduced him as Deke. Deke looked at Madison with an evaluation that was not unfriendly but was thorough. "You're the one who didn't open the register," he said. "People keep saying that like it's something complicated," she said. "Most complicated things look simple after the fact," he said. She made coffee and brought it to the booth where they were sitting, then started the morning prep because that was her job, regardless of who was in the bar and what they were discussing. But she listened, because listening was also something she was good at. Deke was there because of something that had come up in the investigation that Jackson hadn't mentioned to her yet. One of the 41 businesses on Cole's ledger was a mechanic's shop on the edge of town. A man named Paul Giray, who had been paying for 22 months. Paul Giray was 68 years old, a widower, and the mechanic's shop had been in his family for 40 years. He had given a statement to Helen Park's office 2 weeks ago. But Paul Giray had also 8 months ago done something that nobody had connected to Cole's operation until the ledger came out. He had stopped making payments. Just stopped. Stopped answering the phone, stopped leaving the envelope. For 8 months he had been refusing in silence, alone, without telling anyone. And Cole's people had not escalated. Madison had asked Briggs about that, and Briggs had said he did not know why yet. Maybe Paul had not been worth the attention. Maybe Cole had decided the amount was too small to push on. Maybe there was a reason connected to something they had not uncovered yet. But Deke had another theory. "Paul's shop is on the corner of Route 9 and Miller Creek Road," Deke said to Jackson. "You know what's on Miller Creek Road." Jackson was quiet. "Miller's house," Deke said. "Our Miller. The man you called 3 weeks ago to get things positioned." He looked at his coffee. "Cole's people drive past Miller's place every time they go out to Paul's shop, and they know whose house that is. So 8 months ago when Paul stopped paying, they didn't push. Because the math said the message they'd send by pushing was a message they couldn't afford to send. They thought Paul was protected," Madison said from behind the bar. Both men looked at her. "He didn't know he was protected," Deke said. "Miller didn't know Paul had stopped paying. Paul didn't know Miller existed, but Cole's people looked at the geography and made an assumption." "A true assumption," Madison said, "just an accidental one." "Sometimes the protection that matters most is the kind you don't know you have," Deke said. He looked at Jackson. Paul Giray walked into his shop for 8 months believing he was doing something alone. He wasn't. He just didn't know it. Jackson was looking at something in the middle distance that wasn't in the room. "I want to tell him that," he said. "I want Paul to know." "I figured," Deke said. "That's why I came." That afternoon, Jackson closed the bar for 2 hours. He drove out to the mechanic shop on Route 9, and Madison drove with him because he asked her to, and she didn't ask why. Paul Giray was a thin man with the kind of rough, capable hands that belonged to someone who had spent 40 years doing physical work. He looked at Jackson and Madison in his shop doorway with an expression that held equal parts weariness and dignity. Jackson told him about Miller, about the geography, about 8 months of Cole's people driving past a piece of information they didn't have and stopping. Paul listened without speaking. When Jackson finished, Paul stood in his shop doorway for a long moment. He looked at his hands. He looked at the tools arranged on the wall behind him. The order of a man who needed certain things to stay where he put them. I thought I was just being stupid, Paul said quietly. I stopped paying because I got sick of it. Not brave, not strategic, just sick of it. Like you get sick of anything you've been doing too long. He paused. I kept waiting for something bad to happen, and then when it didn't, I kept waiting for the other shoe. And it never dropped. And I thought maybe they forgot about me. Maybe I got lucky. He looked up at Jackson. I wasn't lucky. You weren't lucky, Jackson agreed. You were living next door to something bigger than you knew. But it worked. Whatever the reason, it worked. And for what it's worth, Jackson said, the fact that you were sick of it and stopped anyway, that matters. Not because it was strategic. Because you did it when you thought you were alone. Paul Giray looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Madison. You're the girl from the bar, he said. Yes. I heard about what you did with the register. I heard about what you did with the envelope, she said. I think yours was harder. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted, in the way faces shifted when a person received something they had not expected to need. You want coffee, he said. I've got a pot in the back. They stayed 45 minutes. They talked about the shop and about Paul's son in Seattle, who had been calling every day since the article came out. About the particular quality of Montana winters and how they were hardest in the shop. They talked about nothing connected to investigations or lawyers or ledgers. They talked the way people talked when the reason for being somewhere turned out to be less about the stated purpose and more about the simple act of showing up. On the drive back, Madison said, Deke knew about Paul's shop. Yeah, Jackson said. He's been keeping an eye on things even after that night. The people who were in the parking lot, they went home after. But home doesn't mean the same thing as gone. They've been in this county as long as I have, some of them longer. He drove for a moment. Miller lives on Miller Creek Road because that's where he's always lived. That's not protective positioning, that's just life. He glanced at her. But life adds up to something over time. You accumulate a presence without planning to. And sometimes that presence does work you didn't intend. Like a locked cabinet that everyone can see, she said, even when it's closed. Jackson looked at her. That's exactly what it's like, he said. The charges against Dale Harmon were filed on a Thursday morning, the same day of the week as everything else that had mattered in this story. Madison found out from Carrie Dunn, who texted her a single line at 7:48. It's done. Files this morning. 14 counts. 14. She stood behind the bar with her phone in her hand and thought about the arithmetic of accountability. How 5 years of permits and phone calls and slow-walked licenses and $300 a month from a flower shop added up to a number like 14. How silence multiplied. How the absence of accountability compounded the same way debt compounded invisibly until the amount was staggering. She texted back, "Thank you for everything you did to make this happen." Carrie replied immediately, "You started this the night you didn't open the register." Madison put her phone down and went back to work. Because the bar needed to open, and the coffee needed to be made, and Lily needed to be picked up at 3:15. And those things did not stop being true because something large and important had happened at 7:48 in the morning. Ray Kowalski came in at noon. He already knew. Word moved the way it always moved in a town of 7,000. He sat at his stool and ordered his water and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, 14 counts, for the commissioner. For the commissioner, Madison confirmed. Ray was quiet. He turned his water glass in his hands. I voted for that man twice, he said. I put a sign in my yard. A lot of people did, Madison said. That doesn't make me feel better. It shouldn't, she said, but it also doesn't make you responsible for what he did. You voted for someone you thought was something. He wasn't that thing. She looked at Ray steadily. The only person responsible for who Dale Harmon was is Dale Harmon. Ray nodded slowly. And Cole Grayson. And Cole Grayson, she agreed. And Gary Stills, Ray said. He had been following the reporting carefully, she realized, reading every piece Cahill filed. Gary Stills pleaded out last week, Madison said. Briggs told Jackson. 18 months, probably less, with good behavior. His cooperation helped close the gap between the text messages and the permit records. So everybody is getting what they deserve, Ray said. Not a question, almost a wonder. Mostly, Madison said. The system is slow and imperfect. Some of the 41 businesses are never going to see the money they lost. But the people who built this are going to be held accountable for building it. That's not everything, but it's not nothing either. Ray finished his water. He looked at the bar, at the register sitting exactly where it belonged, at the back cabinet closed and locked, at the afternoon light coming in through the windows doing what it did in October. And he said quietly, "This is a good place." "Yeah," Madison said. "It is." The Thursday evening crowd that night was larger than it had ever been. Not in a dramatic way. Not the kind of crowd that arrived because something had happened, but the kind that arrived because a place had become what people needed it to be. 3 booths that were usually empty on Thursdays were full. The bar had no open stools by 7. The kitchen was running 40 minutes behind, which was a problem they had never had on a weeknight, which Jackson addressed by coming out of the back office and personally apologizing to every table and offering a round on the house. Because that was who he was, and had always been. At 8, Dennis Cahill came in. He had been in 3 times since the night at the motel, always alone, always ordering the coffee. Always with his laptop and his recorder in the particular focused quiet of a man who knew he was in the middle of something that mattered. He had filed 7 pieces in 6 weeks, each one tighter and more precise than the last. The series had been picked up by 3 larger publications and had brought a level of outside attention to Redwood Falls that the town was still negotiating its relationship with. He sat at the bar. Madison poured his coffee without being asked. 14 counts, he said. 14, she said. My editor wants a final piece, he said. Something that ties it together. Not just the case, the human side of it. What it looked like from inside the town. He wrapped his hands around the mug. I want to write it around you. She looked at him. Around me. The bartender who didn't open the register. That's the frame the whole story built on. Without that Thursday night, the list stays in a cabinet. The AG's office never gets called. Greta Sorensen counts out another envelope in February. He held her eyes. I want to know what it looked like from where you were standing. She thought about that for a moment. She thought about all the versions of herself that had existed in that moment. The version standing at the bar at 11:47 with Cole Grayson's hand around her wrist. The version on her mother's couch at 6:43 in the morning with a bruise on her cheek. The version sitting across from Greta Sorensen while an anger 48 months old finally found somewhere to go. I wasn't thinking about any of that, she said, when it happened. I wasn't thinking about lists or investigations or 41 businesses. I was thinking about not letting someone take something that wasn't theirs to take. That's the story, Cahill said. That's not a story, she said. That's just Tuesday. He smiled. That's exactly why it's the story. She told him, not everything. Some things were not for a piece that would be read by strangers, but the shape of it. What Thursday night had felt like from the inside. What it felt like to watch a room full of people make the calculation that there was nothing they could do, and to make a different calculation. Not because she was braver than them, but because the alternative felt more unbearable than the risk. She told him about Lily asking why she had slept on Grandma's couch, about the medical bills and the double shifts, and the way she had built a small life out of work and stubbornness, and the refusal to believe that things couldn't get better. She told him that the register had felt like the 1 inch of ground she could hold, and so she had held it. Cahill wrote and listened and asked 3 questions in an hour. None of them were the questions she expected. After he had gone, Jackson came out from the kitchen and stood beside her at the bar. What did you tell him? He asked. The truth, she said. The small version of it. The small version is the right version, he said. The big version is for lawyers. The bar closed at midnight. The last customer left at 5 past, a young woman who had come in around 9 and sat alone in a corner booth, nursing one drink for 2 hours and writing something in a paper notebook. The kind of thing that happened in bars that had become what the Iron Horse had become. A place where people came to think, not just to drink. Jackson locked the front door. Madison finished the wipe down. The two of them moved around each other in the familiar rhythm of closing, which was the same as it had always been, except that everything underneath the familiarity was different now. In the way that things were different when they had been tested and held. At 12:20, Madison was putting on her coat when Jackson said her name. She turned. He was standing by the back cabinet. He had the key in his hand but had not opened it. He was looking at the latch the way a person looked at something they had been carrying for so long that putting it down required a deliberate decision. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Okay." "When you came in that morning after Thursday night, the first morning, when you still had the bruise and the bar was a mess, you said I should have told you things were building." He looked up from the cabinet. "You were right. I kept too much to myself. Not because I didn't trust you, because I was used to carrying things alone. Because that's what I had been doing for 15 years, and I didn't know how to stop doing it, even when I should have." He paused. "I'm trying to learn how to stop." "I know," she said. "I watched you learn it the past 6 weeks. Every time you told Briggs something. Every time you sat down with Carrie Dunn. Every time you let someone else carry part of it. I watched you figure out how to do that." She held his eyes. "You're already better at it than you think." He was quiet for a moment. "The vest," he said. "What about it?" "I have been thinking about what I want to do with it." He looked at the cabinet. "For 15 years I kept it locked away because I thought it was evidence of something I was ashamed of. But after everything that's happened, after Amanda Rohr and Paul Giray and Greta Sorensen and the list and all of it," he stopped. "I think I had the wrong relationship with my own history. I kept it locked away like it was a weapon instead of a record." He turned the key in his hand. "It's a record of a person trying to protect people the only way he knew how at the time," she said. "And then learning a better way." She walked to the cabinet. She stood beside him. "Then keep it where you can see it," she said. "Not locked away. Not displayed like a trophy. Just where you can see it. So you remember both things at once." He looked at her. Then he unlocked the cabinet. He opened it. He took the vest out. He folded it once and set it on top of the cabinet, not inside it, where it could be seen from anywhere in the room by anyone who came through the door. He did not say anything. He did not need to. They finished closing. Jackson turned off the last lights. Madison went to her car. The parking lot was cold and quiet and full of stars, the way it always was on clear October nights in Montana, when the sky did what it wanted without asking anyone's permission. She sat in her car. She was thinking about something Deke had said that morning. The thing about Paul Giray walking into his shop for 8 months, believing he was alone, and not being alone. And she was thinking about the cabinet open now instead of locked. And she was thinking about Carrie Dunn calling her the person who started this, and Cahill saying the frame the whole story built on, and Greta Sorensen saying, "I should have done more," and then doing more. She was thinking about how stories look from inside them versus how they look from outside them. How from the inside you were just a person in a bar at 11:47 with a hand on your wrist making the only decision that felt possible. How from the outside that became a frame, a starting point, the night everything changed. She didn't feel like a frame. She felt like a woman who needed to pick her daughter up at 3:15. She started the car. 6 weeks later, 12 weeks after the night itself, Cahill's final piece ran in a regional publication that reached 200,000 readers. It was titled simply, "What She Held." It was about the register, about what it meant to hold 1 inch of ground when everything else was moving, about a bar in Redwood Falls, Montana, and the people who came to it, and the thing they had gone through together, and what was left when they came out the other side. It mentioned Jackson Walker without dwelling on his past. 3 sentences that acknowledged who he had been and gave most of the space to who he had become. It mentioned Greta Sorensen by name, with her permission, and the story of 48 envelopes, and the anger that had nowhere to go until suddenly it did. It mentioned Ray Kowalski standing up twice and what it had meant to him to stand up the second time. It mentioned Carrie Dunn and the 30-year friendship and the decision not to push until there was something real to offer. And it mentioned a 6-year-old girl named Lily whose mother could carry 6 plates at once and who believed this was a superpower, because it was. Madison read it at the bar on a Thursday morning before opening with her coffee and the chairs still upside down on the tables. When she finished, she set her phone down and looked at the cabinet behind the counter. Open now. The vest folded on top, visible to anyone who came through the door. She thought about everything that had been inside that cabinet for 15 years. Not just the leather and the patches and the photograph, but everything they represented. The weight of a life trying to become something different, the patient, difficult work of choosing better when better was harder, the willingness to keep choosing it, even when nobody was watching. She thought about Jackson making his first call to Miller 3 weeks before Thursday night, alone in his back office, believing he was the only one who could see what was coming, and deciding to position something in case he was right. She thought about Greta Sorensen in February, counting $300 in silence, telling herself it was the last time. She thought about Paul Giret stopping. Just stopping. Because he was sick of it. Not knowing why it worked, just knowing it did. She thought about what it meant for a place to become what people needed it to be. Not through design, not through intention, but through what happened inside it, and who was there when it happened, and what they chose to do. The door opened. Ray Kowalski walked in 20 minutes before opening time, which he had never done in 8 years of Thursdays. "We're not open," she said. "I know," he said. He sat at his stool. "I brought something." He put a newspaper on the bar, the local paper which had run a piece on the Harmon charges and had quoted Cahill's work. He pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. "Read that." She read it. It was a quote from Helen Park's office about the scope of the case, how the combination of witness statements and documentary evidence had created what the AG described as one of the most complete records of municipal corruption and organized extortion they had encountered in the state. "One of the most complete records," Ray said, "because of Jackson's list, because of 9 people who came forward and then 32 more, because of the ledgers that Cole kept to protect himself from the people he was supposed to be protected by." He looked at her. That whole thing unraveled because the wrong man had the right habits. She thought about that. Jackson's 2-year patience, Cole's physical ledgers, Harmon's text messages kept on a personal phone, the geography of Miller's house, Deke knowing about Paul's shop, Amanda Rohr keeping a phone number for 15 years. None of it had been designed. All of it had added up. "Ray," she said. "Yeah. Same time next Thursday?" He looked at her. He picked up the newspaper and folded it once and put it in his jacket pocket. "Same time every Thursday," he said. "For as long as this place is standing." Jackson came in through the back at 7:30, same as every morning. He put his keys on the counter. He made his coffee. He looked at the vest on top of the cabinet, and at Madison, and at the bar with its upside-down chairs and its morning quiet and its possibility. "Ready," he said. She turned the sign in the window from closed to open. "Ready," she said. And the Iron Horse Tavern opened for another day in Redwood Falls, Montana. Not because it had to, not because anything dramatic was left to happen, but because it was the kind of place that was worth opening, a place built by one man's long effort to become better than he had been, held together by the daily work of a woman who had learned that the most powerful thing you could do was refuse to give up the 1 inch of ground that was yours to hold. It was not a perfect place. It had a jukebox that skipped on certain songs, a back booth with a wobble that Jackson had been meaning to fix for 6 months, a kitchen that ran 40 minutes behind on busy nights. It had a cabinet that was not locked anymore. It had a regular who had spent 8 years on the same stool and one Thursday night discovered something uncomfortable about himself and came back the following Thursday anyway. That was what it was. and that was exactly enough. Because the greatest thing a person could do was not the dramatic thing. It was not the moment with the motorcycles in the parking lot, or the 14 counts filed on a Thursday morning. It was the daily, unglamorous, patient decision to be the kind of person who showed up, who held the ground, who remembered that the register was not just a register, and the envelope was not just an envelope, and the vest on the cabinet was not just a vest. They were what people chose to do when it mattered.